We lost most of our friends. We lost our spiritual community. We were told not to come back there. And we lost our income, lost our influence in a short period of time. We lost our dream house. We lost pretty much everything, including almost, ourselves and our family.
Hey guys, you're listening to The Glass House hosted by Lifeway. We are Ben and Lindley Mandrell, and we have conversations with leaders who have experienced the stress of ministry and have sensed a spotlight on their personal lives. We want to encourage ministry families and provide a glimpse inside their glass house. Well, today on the Glass House podcast, we are excited to have David and Caron Loveless with us, who pastored a significant church in Orlando for many years and have an incredible story. And as we talk about the subject today of shame and dealing with shame in the ministry, we think today that you're going to really resonate and be encouraged and challenged by what they have to share. So, David and Caron, thanks for coming on the show. Tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your story. Just take a few minutes and help us get to know you.
Yeah, it's great being with you. We do a lot of work with leaders around the country, ministry couples, where we help them figure out how can you have a thriving ministry without losing your soul. Mm-hmm. And so we really focus in on what does it mean to live, love, and lead out of a healthy soul. And out of our story, we've had lots of seasons and dimensions where it's been very healthy, and then other seasons not so much, which we'll get into in a moment. Currently, I'm on the staff here at First Baptist Orlando. I'm on the executive and teaching team, and I give leadership to all 5 of our campuses, plus the leadership development we're doing across the board.
But you grew up in a pastor's home.
But I grew up in a pastor's home. Yes, the good and the bad of that.
You know a little bit about church.
Yeah. So on the church side, I grew up in this pastor's home. We ended up meeting at a Baptist church a number of years later. We ended up going to seminary after getting married, and then took off for British Columbia to plant a church and all that. So when we started off in ministry, we were both deeply, deeply passionate about God, not just doing the work of God, but God himself. Mm-hmm. We were deeply passionate about reaching people that wouldn't be caught dead in their own coffin inside of a church, and then discipling them where there can be, in effect, 3 generations out. So we were highly committed to that, over the many years that we were involved in ministry. On top of that, we both had determined prior to day one of our marriage that our marriage and our family was going to hold the highest priority. Our spiritual lives, our spiritual practices were going to hold all that. And then over the years, for whatever odd reason, God allowed there to emerge a decent level of success in terms of how Christian leaders tend to think about ministry success. And all of a sudden, we found the church that we had founded and led for a number of years started showing up on multiple top 100 lists, fastest growing, most influential, all that other jazz. But all of that came horribly, horribly crashing down 8.5 years ago when I woke up, Caron, on an infamous morning, and I was just wailing. She had no idea what I was about to share with her. And I said, I have the worst possible thing to tell you about me. She immediately started thinking,
somebody's died, something's happened to someone we care about. There's been an accident, or something's happened in some way. Just no way in the world would I have imagined that what he was about to tell me truly was eventually, within days, going to become headline news. It was going to become public to our community. It was going to be on the newspaper. It's going to be on the news. It was going to be out in blogs and magazines across the nation. And I mean, if you'd have told me that this guy that I married, that I was so convinced was honestly the best guy I knew, literally, I saw him behind the scenes. I knew what his life was like, that this was going to be our story. I would have not, that this really was the last thing on my mind that I would ever have imagined we would have gone through as a couple. Yeah. And I know that's not news to people that have been through this. I mean, usually that's the case. I mean, you have very good people meaning very well with their lives, and then something happens and something breaks, and then you're reeling from that.
Yeah. So when I woke her up on that infamous morning, I confessed to her about a relationship of infidelity I'd engaged in more than several years earlier that no one knew about. And through a series of circumstances, I felt like I now needed to tell her about it and several of the leaders in our church. And as hellish as I had imagined and forecasted all this was going to be in the fallout, it turned out to be even a million times worse than all the horrific ways I had imagined this. We very quickly, in a short period of time, we lost most of our friends. We lost our spiritual community. We were told not to come back there. And we lost our income, lost our influence in a short period of time. We lost our dream house. We lost pretty much everything, including almost, ourselves and our family. We have 3 grown sons, by the way, and daughter-in-laws that, after that morning of sharing with her how I betrayed the most sacred trust that she had in me, that evening we had our kids come over and I confessed to them. I let them ask any questions they wanted to. And so that right there descended us into a new level of hell we never knew existed. Wow. For the next couple of years.
So when we talk about shame and feeling ashamed, this is something that you've had to really work through, David, that you've really had to process this in a healthy way.
Yes, I have had, but I would also say that you have had to deal with a lot. Why don't you share about the shame you had to deal with in all this, and then we can talk about the foundation of it in my own life.
Yeah, first of all, I think just a little definition. Our definition of shame is the feeling of I'm not enough. Yeah. Guilt is I haven't done enough. But shame is I'm not enough personally myself. And one of the things that we're able to see now as we talk about what were the vulnerability places, because that was one of the first questions we were asked is, how did you become so vulnerable? You were so strong. You had so much belief in all the right things, all your values in the right place. You had strong character. How did this happen? And so you come to a place of vulnerability in your relationship and you start to see, a part of what our vulnerability came through a lot of things like just chronic stress, but stress that we brought on ourselves. And this is something we do not talk about in ministry. This feeling of we're confident, we believe in our mission, but at the same time, we have questions about our own ability to pull off whatever we've been called to do. Yeah. And so that is my not enoughness talking. And so a lot of times in our relationship, David had to deal with it in his own way. This is before anything has even happened. We already are dealing with this not enoughness shame that for some reason I don't have enough of whatever it is. And if somebody's going to find out about that, they're not going to follow me as a leader. And I was also on staff. I was a part of the ministry, very, very integral part of what we did there. So it wasn't like, we were both dealing with this not enough feeling. And, but it was all under the surface. This is subconscious. This is not conscious thoughts. These are just, I realize now I need to make myself look better. we need to be better. Our church needs to be better. Yes. And so there was a drivenness to figure out that shame. And of course, when all of this came down and we're talking about shame at a whole nother level. Now I'm afraid to go out to the mailbox unless it's dark, because I'm afraid my neighbors are going to speak to me about what has happened. And I didn't go to the grocery store for 6 months. I mean, there is no way to really, unless you've been through this and walked through this particular thing, to comprehend the level of shame that now both of us have. It's not just him, but a couple carries together in that, and then a family, and then of course a church. And so there was just a lot of levels.
Yeah. Well, I want to just chime in here and say, I think you're really putting a finger on something that many people in ministry feel of, I'm not enough. Sometimes we associate shame with, I've made this disastrous decision, which obviously in this case, you have a story around that. But a lot of times what we feel like pastor and pastors' wives are feeling of, I'm not enough for my people. I'm not enough for a certain group in the church. I just don't measure up. I'm never going to measure up. And that just leads to depression.
Yeah, and I'm not even enough for God.
Lindley, I know in ministry, particularly over the last 5 years, particularly in church planning, we pushed ourselves so hard to produce that it often affected us even physically.
Right. What David was talking about was the arrogance of capacity. And he was referring to even within your body, how you just push yourself so strongly sometimes to where you can't function. And I know personally, I really resonated with that because when we were in church planting and I was working for the church on staff, there were several times where I had just severe bouts of vertigo. And, you talk about emotions. I was so angry with that because I needed to be getting things done. At the end, we were building a building. We had a due date, to get in right before Christmas. The building was getting close. It was tight. And so we just pushed. Well, I ended up getting so sick, right? We made it and we had Christmas. And then I remember the date, it was January 3rd was going to be our big kickoff, celebration. And I could not even be there. I was so physically sick that, I had lost weight. I was stressed. I was dizzy. And so really, this arrogance of capacity, I had believed I could do all that while having 4 small children and dealing with Christmas time, just the general business of that and school programs. So I just didn't balance it well.
There are seasons of heightened busyness and frantic activity that are unavoidable, but I think where we make mistake is we don't budget time to recharge and come back with some rest. And when David talks about how your body is always talking to you, I think there's some truth there that people in ministry need to pay attention to. So check out this clip and listen to what he has to say on that. I am really interested to hear what you guys mean by arrogance of capacity. I know that's a term you guys use a lot. And can you just talk a little bit about that? And then we'll come back and pick up your story.
When I use that phrase, to me, it means that I'm not paying attention to the actual limitations of what my soul can handle and what my physical body can handle. So unfortunately, growing up in my era, I watched way too many episodes of Superman. And, I would put, the towel on my back and clip it there, and I would fly around. And little did I know over the years, I just tried to take on a spiritual Superman persona where I thought I am strong enough to handle anything in the world. Every decade, I wound up in the cardiac unit at the hospital for a few days. Everyone thought I was having a stroke or a heart attack, and it was just the stress. And when my body would try to speak to me and put those red lights up on my dashboard, I would go, no, we can plow on through this. You got a little bit more to give. And, a lot of us out of evangelical traditions know what it's like where, the body's more shame-based literally, and you're not supposed to pay attention to it. We don't even buy into any of that garbage these days. First of all, we think it was initially created as wonderful and great by God. But also, we've just come to see that this is a part of God's significant megaphone to us. When we say, I'd love to hear from God more. Well, just start with your body. God is speaking to you through your body. And again, to my peril and to our peril, I didn't pay attention to those things. And it over time, what that did was created a level of exhaustion and stress that I just couldn't manage as well as I thought. A second dimension of arrogance of capacity for me, thinking I'm strong enough to withstand anything or anyone that comes my way. So you guys know over the years, just the leadership pressure that's there. And I'm like, okay, I've been able to handle that, been able to handle any criticism, rejection, resistance, all that. That's just normal life for me. What I didn't realize was I wasn't being strong enough to handle some of the things that Caron was really having to wrestle with, and we were having to wrestle with together. And I never fully owned how much all that was impacting me. And then the most significant thing is I thought I was strong enough to withstand a lady approached me and said, can we be better friends? I went, what are you talking about? We're already friends, we're all good here. Several months later, she came back and said again,
you even told me
I went home and told Caron.
He came home and told me this conversation existed. And I went, well, that's very interesting. It's not really what I would imagine this person would have said because we've known them for quite a while.
But you immediately pulled out your dart gun. I
was suspicious of her motives.
So a few months later, she approaches me again. You sure we can't be better friends? This time, I did not go home and tell Caron about that. And the reason why I didn't was I thought there is no way in the world someone that is committed as I am to Christ and to Caron and to what God's there's no way in the world that a few innocent conversations in a friendship could ever go south with someone like me. And of course, that lie ended up being my kryptonite.
The shame piece is so real in ministry as we're dealing with the leadership pressures that you mention. If we're not honest about our frailties, if we're not honest about our weaknesses, we find ourselves making decisions we never thought we would make. That's what I hear you saying.
Yes.
So as you guys go back to your story just for a second, once the fallout happened, where did you begin to pick up the pieces?
And even before picking up the pieces, I mean, when you receive that news, Caron, I mean, how do you decide in your mind, like, okay, we're gonna stick this out? I mean, for ladies out there who have experienced this and are currently experiencing it.
It was one of those situations where I was you're in shock, you're numb. It's like for the first few hours, I was angry, I was mad, I was as angry as I've ever been in my whole life. While at the same time, I'm having another conversation in my head that says something like this. Either everything we've put our lives on the line for these last many, many years of our lives in ministry, either everything God says is true or it's not. And we're about to find out if it's true or not. So I'm going to put all my chips on the thing that says there is restoration, there is redemption, there is the ability for grace to walk in a situation and turn it around. I don't know how, and literally in that moment, and for many, many moments and weeks and even years, I mean, there was so much to unpack, so much to get through. But in that moment, I very quickly, within probably the first hour, I made the decision. Either this stuff is real, what Jesus says is true, or it's not. And I'm going to see if what he says is true and real, and he's going to be able to make a way where there seems to be no way. And so that was my thinking right away. But that doesn't negate at all the other feelings that I had also at the same time, which were crushed. I was crushed. It was unbelief, all the things that you can imagine.
Yeah. I tell people Caron ended up demonstrating remarkable levels of courage, grace, and strength toward me and toward us, while all at the same time putting a much deserved beat down on my head for a long period of time. And we, after a couple of weeks, we quickly entered into a therapeutic process with a couple of counselors, ended up probably using 3 or 4 counselors over a period of about 2 years. And it was a rigorous week in, week out stuff. We were really good actually at communicating with each other before. We moved communication to a different level. But in our case, because we've lost jobs, income, everything, guess what we do 12 hours a day? We're yelling, screaming, crying, hugging each other. I mean, all the extremes and everything in between. As we were processing this, we started digging into books like, again, how in God's name could this have happened with me and with us? And we knew it was more than just the simple surface moralistic answers Christian leaders often give. Well, you just must not have had enough accountability in your life, or you must have had another addiction, that was rolling on the side. Yeah. And in my situation, that wasn't the case.
So for us, we would probably say we had to unpack where and how was our relationship vulnerable. And every couple has the ability to look at this if they want to and if they can. And so we had help with this, but at the same time, we recognized we had this chronic stress going on in our life where ego was constantly trying to push the limits of what we were able to do. So that arrogance of capacity was, happening. Mm-hmm. I was also a part of this. In other words, I needed approval too. And as a wife, I see oftentimes in ministry, it's not just the leader who might be the man in the situation, but the wife who is also wanting in her own way to see success happen in their lives. And for them, and honestly, it was it's like there was this enmeshment of, I want to follow God and I want to do God's will in my life and I want to be all I can be for him and bring a church along. At the same time, I have needs to be approved of and to be noticed and seen. And so that's all cooking underneath the surface. And we had unforeseen circumstances that happened, like every single ministry has. But
to your point you were making, and what you guys were alluding to a moment ago, our counselors in the first weekend, we had this intensive weekend with them. They said to the two of us, they said, you both have consistently asked more of your gifts than what they were intended to give. And that just hit us like a ton of bricks, as if nothing else had.
Because we thought, hey, zeal for God's house consumes us. We can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. And so we take on all of these things and we misapply these things. Yeah. And we didn't realize that. We didn't know until it was too late of how we had misapplied some of those very important aspects.
One part of this conversation that I liked was where they spoke about we are consistently asked more of our gifts than we're sometimes able to give. And, I resonated with that of, when you discover what your gift is, the tendency in our culture is to just go all out and, just wear yourself out. Mm-hmm. Like, well, this is my gift and this is how the Lord wants me to be part of the body. And so I need to just do it to the fullest. And then not taking into consideration kind of the things we've said. I mean, there are other things happening in your lives. And sometimes you have to, there's an ebb and flow. Like you may have a gift, but it just can't be used at that time. I mean, I know even when we moved here to Lifeway, I had just come off a season of feeling really gifted leading this kids ministry. Well, I needed to come back and help our children. They were all in middle school and high school and help them adapt to a new city. And it was so hard for me because I felt like, well, I have this gift that I'm not using. But honestly, I was giving my children the gift of me at that time. But, I wrestled with it.
I think one of the places where pastors have arrogance of capacity, I know I did, and just is the amount of times you can preach and be healthy. Mm-hmm. The number of weeks you can preach and be healthy, but also how many services in a weekend can a person preach and be healthy? Mm-hmm. We heard recently about a pastor that's preaching 7 times on a weekend. At what point do you hit this limit where I can't speak this again from the heart? It's going to be numb. I'm going to feel numb. I'm not going to feel worshipful as I share this teaching in God's word. And when we continue to multiply our ministry without recognizing the importance of sabbatical and quiet and rest, I think it's only a matter of time before we burn out.
Well, and what happens after you speak that many times? I mean, typically your day off is Monday. So Monday, you are so, useless to your family, to your spouse, that you jump back in Tuesday. And we all know in ministry, maybe you have Saturday off, but maybe you have a Saturday night service. Maybe you have volunteers who are backing out of their ministry. So really, it's just this endless cycle of just exhaustion.
And that's where it impacts the marriage. Caron did a good job of pointing that out in the conversation of she felt guilty asking him for more, for attention, because she saw that all that he was carrying in the church. And so when a man comes on Monday morning and he's dead to the world and she wants to go and do something fun and explore, and which requires some energy, she's going to stop asking for that, which is going to feed resentment in her own heart. And then it's just this endless weekly repeat of unhealthy habits. Vulnerability is a big piece of healing. How have you learned to use vulnerability? How have you guys used this experience to be a little more raw with people and more authentic?
Yeah. Over the years, I was known as being a very vulnerable leader and communicator. What I now look back and see was I was very vulnerable about the forgivable, unforgivable sins of my life. What I was never, obviously, few of us volunteer for this. We usually get drafted into it, but to actually share what are the unacceptable places of brokenness in me, that I can acknowledge. And so these days, vulnerability to me looks simply like something like this. We all have both beauty in our lives and we all have brokenness in our lives. So I want to make sure that I represent both of those when I'm leading, when I'm teaching, when I'm investing in the lives of other people. I never want to pretend any longer about not just the acceptable parts of brokenness, but the unacceptable parts I've been through. And I'm like, I'll leave this up to God. I mean, it's just as bizarre as all daylight. And you would really appreciate this, that I'm on the staff of First Baptist Orlando. And I would have never imagined they would extend the level of grace to me that they did in inviting me onto their team. But a part of that had to do was they asked Caron and I to come in. Would we be willing to sit down with all their pastors initially and share our story and let them ask questions? And so over the years, we've just learned to be vulnerable at that level in very public forums. Because we've seen what it's done with other people. That, yes, I think it adds to one's own healing, like in my case. And at the same time, we watch it all the time help heal other people. They've either been through this directly or through a parent, through another spouse, something like that.
Well, we, in our counseling journey, came across a definition of vulnerability that's been really helpful to us. And that is, vulnerability is when you share information with someone that they could use that information to hurt you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And intimacy is when two people are willing to do that with one another. Mm-hmm. And when I think about my years in pastoral ministry, 17 years, there were very few people and honestly very few moments when I allowed myself to be that vulnerable with anybody. Yeah. Because in ministry, if you live in that glass house, you're terrified that people might find out some things that could cost you your job or could come back to bite you. So I think one of the challenges there is just how do you manage that?
But he would preach very vulnerably. It sounds like kind of similarly. Mm-hmm. And so, sure. I mean, there were things that he would speak to on a Sunday morning that I was kind of shocked by. Like, I didn't know that. And I was really thankful at the time because I would hear it. But then now that I look back and I think, well, wait, that wasn't healthy. I mean, is that true vulnerability or is that protected vulnerability?
Or is it vulnerability for the purpose of getting attention and approval?
I do think that the vulnerability piece for leaders is particularly difficult because we have a twofold thing going on, as you well know. There's people that they have to put us up on a pedestal. They have to put us in a place of notoriety, of respect. And they want to respect us and they need us to be their heroes. And so we don't want to let them down. But at the same time, we don't realize the damage that we're doing to our own souls and not allowing a place. And we talk a lot to pastors and leaders about pastors having a safe place to talk about anything that could get them fired.
Because pastors don't have a pastor, as you know.
Yeah.
So, I had people in the early stages of our complete meltdown go, why didn't you reach out to a counselor? And I went, because if most every counselor in Central Florida knows who I am. If I go and share with them what I've really done or what I've really wrestled with, then they're going to think less of me. So see my approval showing up again, even in a context like that. And then also what you were just alluding to is most pastors can't be vulnerable because they know that they'll lose their job. If they were to really acknowledge not just behavioral stuff, but doubts they have in their own faith and wrestling matches in their own soul.
Can I mention a biblical text that adds pressure to us, perhaps more than we realize, is the qualifications of a pastor being one who manages his own household well. Mm-hmm. We understand the importance of that. He needs to set a good example for the flock. He needs to care for his children. But I don't know, as a pastor over the years, I always felt like, gosh, if people see that Lindley and I fight, if they see that we have contempt for one another or a certain area, or if they see that our kids are into trouble, there is in the glass house this desire to protect ourselves. So we don't want people to see that, which makes us unwilling to be vulnerable. It seems to be this vicious cycle.
Sure. Yeah, it is a vicious cycle. When I hear scripture references like that, I think, well, my house is in order when I acknowledge what's actually in my house. And what I got in my house is beauty, and I got brokenness. Yeah. And so my house is not in order if I'm in denial of either one of those, with myself and the marriage and the family structure, that kind of deal.
That's really well said.
I also think there's a possibility. We have idealized the Proverbs 31 woman, and we know that that's an idealization of a woman. I wonder if there's also an idealization that we have done with our pastors in a similar way, that we have put this impossible a level to reach out there and saying, this is who you must be before you can, speak for God or whatever. Yeah. We don't speak for God, but we are his partners, his co-laborers in the work he's doing, obviously.
What do you see as the most challenging part of living in that glass house, of having your life in public view?
Well, if you'd asked me this 10 years ago, I probably would have said something completely different. And, but I will say probably the most difficult thing is that when a good leader falls, that, the worst parts of them are exposed and shamed. And, we believe that there should be accountability, and there should be, the importance of transparency with the people that have been affected and the people that need to know. But we have gone into this, the more public the ministry, the more public the scrutiny kind of thing now. And it is really an American thing. It's like the news has taught us that we need to know everything, about everyone. Mm. And so I just really want, to talk just for a second about the way we treat our fallen leaders, because we really could do a much better job in the way that we deal with them. I feel like because they are who they are, we don't allow them their humanity. And in their humanity, they are going to disappoint us. They are going to fail us.
When you went through that, I'm sure there was a point of like, we can never do this again. We can't go through this pain. But you have clearly chosen to come back into ministry. So there had to be some reward of living in the glass house that pulled you back in. So can you explain the rewards of being in the glass house?
I think first and foremost, we felt drawn in by a divine purpose we knew that had been placed in us, that we had never asked to receive, but had been given to us so that we would steward it well. And so I really thought once all this went down 8.5 years ago, I thought my career track was hopefully one day I can be the assistant fry manager at Chick-fil-A. That's really what I thought was the best of what could ever happen. And, after a couple of years, we had some people that came in, some leaders, both locally and national leaders came in and did a restoration service, laid hands on us and said, we don't think your best days are behind you. We believe God is not finished with you yet. And so it's been very rewarding for a small minority of leaders as well as churches that have been able to move in and lean into restoration in, significant ways. That's been very rewarding, that the very house that I had broken, that I would be allowed back in that house to help heal it and repair it and to restore it in one way or the other. These days, I would say a part of that is it's rewarding to be an example of both beauty and brokenness. That's actually it's become an honor for me to be able to do that.
So let's finish with this. There is a ministry couple out there. They think it's over. Something has happened. It's blown up. They think it's never going to be the same again. What's your word of encouragement to them?
I think the first one is, if you've repeatedly tried on your own or together to get this thing right and it's still stuck or it's still screwed up, then get some help. Get some, not help of some friends, but of trained professionals that can help you get to the root issues. Again, all of us have this proclivity toward and this is modeled oftentimes, unfortunately, in the Christian world, we go after the surface moralistic issues and never get to what are the internal drivers that are behind all that.
We thought we were strong enough to handle our problems on our own because we helped other people.
When you help thousands of people, you go, well, then we're smart enough to figure this out.
We're pretty smart. We should be able to figure this out. Yeah. The only problem is we all need a third party, the objective person that can hear both sides and objectively listen. And we were stubborn about that. And I think prideful about that.
I think we could also say there is hope if both of you, it's not just one party, if both of you learn how to name and own your brokenness in a whole new level. To me, there's this amazing metaphor from Genesis where God gives, them the authority and they start naming the animals. I've just come to see these days that you and I can have power and authority over something when we know it, we name it. It's the things that go unnamed in our souls, in our marriages, that end up having power and authority over us. And, finally, I would say we lost almost everything for a long period of time. I could not have possibly hurt Caron more than what I did and my family, and betrayed the trust that thousands of other people had in me. These days, we are blown away by the sheer goodness of God and what he has resurrected. And we would say, seriously, if God can resurrect the mess that we, have been a part of, then there is hope for you.
The Glass House is a production of Lifeway Christian Resources. It's hosted by Ben and Lindley Mandrell, executive produced by Joy Allman, produced and edited by Angie Elkins, original music by Robert Elkins, and graphic design by Cameron Spooner.
Thanks for listening to The Glass House, where we hope to shed light on the dark places of ministry, one conversation at a time.